up to this point, we've looked at ATP, and we looked at how it's the energy currency of the body. We looked at the 3 different biological energy systems that are used to produce ATP on demand, more so recycle ADP into ATP. And now what we're going to start looking at is the practical application of how we utilize this in terms of nutritional recommendations and training ramifications and the needs for our athletes or clients that we're working with. So again, when we look at the energy systems, we had aerobic systems that are long-lasting but slower energy production, and this is the oxidation of both glucose and fat. You also have the anaerobic system, which supplements the aerobic system for higher intensity activities. This is short-lived, and this is supplied by creatine phosphate in the phosphagen system and also glucose in the glycolytic system. And the final result for all of these pathways is ATP, again, ADP into ATP. And what's interesting about this graph is you look at the thickness of the arrow. The thickness of the arrow represents the relative speed of AT production in each of the energy system. And one of the things that we've look at is that for the faster you produce ATP, the lower yield you get. And the slower you produce ATP, the higher yield you get. And if you look at a ranking of ATP versus its production, you'll see the, production versus quantity, its yield. The phosphagen system is the fastest, so if you rank it in order 1 to 5, but it's the slowest, it's the lowest yield. And you go down the chain there, the faster you produce or the slower you produce, the longer you're going to get. So if you look at this in terms of a chart, and this is a chart from your book, that you see the phosphagen system is the fastest in terms of AT production, but it's dead last when it comes to yield or capacity of ATP. At the bottom there, if you look at the oxidation of fats, you'll see that it's the slowest, it's dead last and the slowest, but it's the greatest or highest yielding ATP capacity. And so you keep that in consideration when you think about how much substrate you're producing and where you're at. And so now, when these energy systems are on is based on oxygen availability, and not so much oxygen availability, but exercise intensity. How fast do you need energy in what period of time? So similar type thing when you look at your very, very high intense activity, that's going to be phosphagen system, because that's going to be the system that you're not going to really last a long time, but you need it really, really quick, right? These are things that are measured in 0 to 6 or 0 to 10 seconds. So it doesn't matter if you can't produce a lot. You're only going to do it for a short period of time, and you just need it really quick and really fast. And then when you look at oxidation, these are things that you're not doing for really high force production, so you don't need a lot of it right away, but you're going to be doing a long duration of it, so you're going to need more of it for your aspect. So that's kind of your spectrum there when you look at the energy systems. And again, from your book, you can see this looked out that in the first few seconds of activity, it's going to be your phosphagen system, and not so much don't think of as timing as how long. Think of it for how long you can maintain that level of intensity. So if you see something here that says 6 seconds, it's not, oh, when you do something for only 6 seconds. So let's say you get up and you stand and you start walking. It's not the first 6 seconds of activity is phosphagen system. It's activity that you can only do or maintain for 6 seconds. So think about how hard you're working for something you only do for 6 seconds. So think of it like a full effort jump or like a 5 rep RM, right? 5 rep to failure, not like a warm up that you only do 5 times. When you see like 30 seconds at 2 minutes, it's not just 2 minutes of activity. It's things that you can only do for 2 minutes. So this is like a 400 or 800 meter run. Things that you're doing 10 seconds, 12 seconds, 15 seconds, that's going to be your combination of phosphagen, fast glycolysis, so like a sprint, right? And then 2 to 3 minutes or 3 minutes plus, that's like a mile run or longer. So those are going to be more your oxidative system. And when you start to compare and contrast the 3 systems, you have, right, the major thing is whether it's aerobic or anaerobic, the O2 requirement. Then you look at production speed, like very fast, and the production quantity, which we kind of looked at there. Understanding the substrates, right? Phosphocreatine is the only substrate in the phosphagen system. Glucose or glycogen are the only substrate in the glycolytic system. And then you have the oxidative system that's using carbohydrates and fats. And then protein can be used, but remember, protein is usually converted to a sugar or a fat first, before ketone, before it is used as an energy pathway. So we kind of combine that with the carbohydrate pathway. Your duration, 10 seconds, 2 minutes, indefinite, and then your activities, your power base versus sprint. So kind of knowing which energy system you're in with what activity will help kind of determine how you're going to train and with what recovery and nutritional strategies you're going to implement. So the extent at which an energy system is at play is dependent upon the exercise intensity, but at no time during exercise or rest does any single energy system provide the complete or total energy supply. And so this is the best graph looking at how this is playing out. And remember, there's only three energy systems: phosphagen, glycolytic, oxidative. ATP is represented here in the gold yellow, and that is merely the 2 seconds or so of ATP that you have stored at any given time in your muscle tissue. But remember, your body doesn't really store much of that, but it does keep a little bit on hand. Your phosphagen system here is in that for 6 to 10 seconds worth of activity. Your glycolytic system here in red peaks about 2 minutes into its a primary aspect, and then your oxidative system for things that are greater than 2 to 3 minutes. Now the way this looks is that you have 100%, and you'll see that nothing is ever 100% contribution to energy. This is a cumulative effect. So if you look here, things that you can only do for about 40 seconds or so, you're going to be about 90% of your energy is going to be coming from glycolytic, and the other 10% is going to be coming from the oxidative. So 10 plus 90 equals 100. Even here in the phosphagen system, about 95% is coming from creatine phosphate, about 5 or 6% is coming from glucose, and the rest is coming from the oxidative system. So here at the 120 second mark, you're about 50-50, 50% coming from sugar, 50% coming from fat. And then over here, you'll see about 90% of your energy is coming from the oxidative system and about 10% from the glycolytic. So that's how you look at this graph in terms of contribution. The other thing you look at this graph is, we look at time at the bottom here. But time and intensity, it's really a three-dimensional graph, and it's almost implying the same aspect in that it's looking at not your 60 seconds of activity or 30 seconds. So usually you want to read a graph from left to right, and we start here and say, okay, the first 10 seconds were here, next 30 seconds, and then 60 seconds in there. And that's correct. That's how you normally read a graph, except this graph. And the reason is that we're not starting over here at 0. You're never at 0 intensity. If you're at 0 intensity, you're basically not breathing. You're dead. You're starting way over here, and you're doing an activity like sitting in your chair watching a video that you can do for hours at a time, right? And then if you get up and go for a walk, that's something that's measured in hours. So you're actually starting over here, not here, and moving, oh, okay, your first 10 seconds of activity, and you're already active. You're alive. You're breathing air. You're metabolizing energy. You're over here. And so how this starts is it actually starts from here over to there, right? So you're at low intensity activity right now. If you get up and you start to do an event like get up and sprint, you're going to move even from here in the oxidative pathway where you're 90% oxidative and 10% glycolytic. Now it's questionable whether you're using sugar or fat. That's dependent upon what you ate 3 hours ago. But you are clearly in the oxidative system. And if you get up and you start sprinting whoosh, over here, you're going to have to get the phosphagen system on just to kind of keep you afloat for the first 10 seconds to allow your glycolytic system to kick in and take over. So again, it's not 30 seconds of activity, it's activity you can only do for 30 seconds. So think about how hard you're working. It's activity you can only do for 2 or 3 seconds. So think about how hard you're working to fail in 3 seconds. So that's how you kind of navigate these energy pathways, these energy systems. And it, again, like I said, it's going to be a guide for how you look at exercise for your substrate replacement. Really, the most important aspect I'll come out and tell you is this should be the gauge of how much carbohydrate you need to be consuming, right? How much time do you spend in this glycolytic state, activity that you can only do for 90 seconds or less or 120 seconds and less? If you're not actively in this state, you shouldn't really be consuming a whole bunch of carbohydrate, right? Your body just doesn't need it. You have a limited supply of sugar, both in the liver and the muscles, and unless you are burning through that sugar on a regular basis, you're only burning glycogen only about this much. So you need maybe 50 to 100 grams a day if you're not doing anything. And that's kind of where the basis of the ketogenic diet comes from. But the ketogenic diet sucks if you're an athlete because you are spending some time in the glycolytic state and you're driving your carbohydrate levels down low. So like when we look at different sporting events, different ratios of how much percentage is coming from each of these energy systems, right? So you have the phosphagen system, glycolytic, oxidative, and as you would suspect, things that are like distance running is going to be very low phosphagen system, but really high in the oxidative. So almost 3/4 of your energy is coming from the oxidative system, with a little bit coming from these two other energy systems. You're never in a single energy system, even a golf swing that takes just 2 seconds. Yes, majority, almost all of it's coming from the phosphagen system, but the glycolytic system is still on. The flame is still going. And I would argue that this is 0. This is probably 1 or 2 to maybe get to 100, but your oxidative system is still always working, right? If you look at this chart before, none of these ever come to 0, right? They might end in 0 because they're no longer there. They've run out of substrate, but you're never at 0 for both the oxidative or glycolytic. So if we compare this to like distance running here, we can see that we're way over here where we're like 70% oxidative, 20% glycolytic, and a little bit of phosphagen, right? But you're going to be measuring this in terms of minutes, maybe hours. When you look at a swimming 50-meter event, you're measuring this in seconds or milliseconds. So you're going to be, I'm sorry, not milliseconds. This is going to be like a 30-second or 20-second event, so you're going to be way over here. Again, a little bit from the phosphagen system, maybe right here, 55% from the glycolytic system, and about 5 or 10% from the oxidative system. And then you look at a golf swing like we looked at there before, you're going to be here, that takes seconds to do, so you're going to be at like 95% and a little bit of the glycolytic and oxidative system. That's the application of your energy systems. And we'll be spending a lot of time with this graph, superimposing this into the next lecture or next chapter, which is the endocrine system, looking at hormonal and adaptive processes. And we'll be superimposing how the glycolytic system and the hormones that are there for metabolic processes also lead to the recovery for the storage tissues and so forth. So understanding this graph and knowing how to navigate it, it's going to be the backdrop of how we look at most of our other aspects.